whether you call it research impact or knowledge exchange or engagement or whatever language we use, I think the idea of helping people translate what they're doing into something which has, economic, societal, environmental, health benefit is a really great thing to do. It's very rewarding.
Hello there, I'm Sarah McCluskey and this is Research Adjacent. Each episode, I talk to amazing research-adjacent professionals about what they do and why it makes a difference. Keep listening to find out why we think the research-adjacent space is where the real magic happens. For this episode, I'm chatting to Hamish McAlpine. Hamish is currently Director of Policy and Engagement at Oxentia, an innovation consultancy firm, although he has previously worked in research management and research policy. In fact, those of you in the knowledge exchange world might recognise him as the man behind the KEF, the UK Knowledge Exchange Framework. Others of you are probably already wondering what on earth knowledge exchange even is, and indeed what I most enjoyed about my chat with Hamish was our discussion around the language and silos that have emerged in this area. Ultimately, we agreed that knowledge exchange, tech transfer, commercialisation, engagement and impact are all variations of the same thing. It's all about getting research out into the world where it can make a difference. Listen on to hear more. So welcome along, Hamish. Thanks so much for coming along to have a chat.
Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation.
So I wonder if we could begin our conversation with you telling us exactly what it is that you do.
Well, how do I describe it? So I am a director at Oxentia, which is a specialist innovation management consultancy based out of Oxford. We started our life as an operating division within Oxford University Innovation, which is the sort of technology transfer arm of the University of Oxford. We effectively spun out of there a number of years ago. We were then called ISIS Enterprise, and we rebranded in 2017, I think, slightly before my time, for fairly obvious reasons, to Oxentia. And we offer consulting, training, and we run accelerator programs and other capacity building programs across universities, both in the UK and internationally. We also work with governments and foundations and development banks and corporate clients as well, offering a range of services around innovation management, knowledge exchange strategy, commercialization support, that kind of thing.
I think you've used words there that I think some of my listeners will be very familiar with, but some might not be quite so familiar. So I wonder if maybe you could give us something like an example of a kind of project that kind of explains what tech transfer or knowledge exchange or that kind of thing, what you mean by that term.
Yeah, so I'm kind of fascinated by this because the name of the podcast around research adjacent, I've always kind of considered myself that. But when I look at the kind of communities that I inhabit and the conferences I go to, there's often not that much overlap with sort of research impact and sort of research administration, like sort of ARMA type conferences. So when I talk about knowledge exchange, I mean simply any interaction that an academic or a student at a university has with someone who's not another academic. So it's all about that kind of imparting of knowledge and that two-way exchange of knowledge between the university and the wider world. And that could be tech transfer. So that could be, taking some kind of invention that, has been derived from research and commercializing it, turning it into a spin-out company or licensing it to an existing company. Similarly, it could be about offering skills training, based on, people's practice at the university. It could be about public engagement, community engagement. It's that full gamut of things the universities do. And increasingly, I just have conceptualized knowledge exchange and commercialization as just a pathway to impact. You can imagine this really simple logic model of, you've got some money, you do something, you get some outcomes that leads to some impacts. Knowledge exchange are just the activities you do on that pathway to impact.
I think you're right there in saying that it's
I also find it a bit strange the way these worlds kind of don't overlap in the way that you might think, because often people think about impact and pathways to impact, and they think about things like public engagement or communications or that sort of thing. But to me, as you say, they're all kind of part and parcel of the same thing. It's all this, the way that the university works with the wider world, whatever that means, and it'll mean different things to different types of research. I think people often think about knowledge exchange more in terms of the hard sciences, for want of a better word, or, you know, economics or things like that, business type stuff. But I mean, I've heard some really great examples recently of knowledge exchange projects in the arts and humanities and things as well. Has that also been your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. I mean, you asked about a kind of concrete example before, and I think some of the best ones are from arts, humanities, social sciences, what we'd call the shape disciplines. One of the things Oxentia do is manage the Aspect Network on behalf of the London School of Economics. So that's a network of universities originally funded by UKRI, and it was exploring what does commercialisation look like for the social sciences. And that network's grown to nearly 50 universities in the UK. And one of the big things is, you know, the language that people use. So, you know, if you're a scientist, commercialization is probably quite a familiar concept. If you're a historian, a psychologist, if you're working in education, it means less, or maybe it's, you know, even actively off-putting. So, but what I see is around commercialization, it doesn't mean for profit necessarily. It doesn't mean you have to set up a limited company. It doesn't mean you have to sell anything. There's lots of really great models, you know, not-for-profit companies or franchising something and setting it up in such a way that you're getting your research out there, but you're also getting, for example, data back from the people who are using that, and you're reinvesting all of that to progress your research. So we've kind of increasingly taken to talking about commercialization in the shape disciplines as not commercialization, but impact at scale.
Right.
It's not commercialization, it's just a way of scaling your impact, sometimes really effectively.
No, that's a really nice way of framing it. Yeah, and thinking about impact and extending that impact rather than thinking of it as a different thing. And some of the things that you're talking about out there are exactly the kind of activities that I know other people would refer to as, you know, engagement or you know, liaison or something. It's just all this different kinds of language for very similar activities.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one thing that struck me, I was reading the REF 2028 guidance, and there's maybe an opportunity here, because they're talking about now, instead of just impact, engagement and impact. And there's this idea of, you know, maybe we should think about the rigor of that engagement. And engagement, to me, how you do the thing that led to the impact, that's knowledge exchange.
Yeah.
And the rigor of the engagement is therefore how well you do knowledge exchange. So I think, you know, these are two worlds that are really quite closely aligned, but have just, you know, for various reasons kind of grown up their own separate communities. So
yeah, I think there are some people doing some work to try and bring them together. I know that the National Coordinating Centre for Public Engagement and Praxis Oriel, which is about knowledge exchange, they're doing some collaborative work at the moment. So we might start to see some of those overlaps becoming more apparent. But yes. Oh, really interesting stuff. Thank you. So I wonder if you could tell us how you even got into working in knowledge exchange in the first place. What's been your journey?
A kind of slightly random or haphazard one, I guess. So my undergraduate degree was in engineering at the University of Bath. And after that, you know, I'd always wanted to be an engineer. I left. I worked for what was then Chorus in Sheffield, probably better known as British Steel. So that was around kind of manufacturing process improvement, very kind of traditional engineering, I guess. But I think, to be honest, spending 4 years in Bath kind of spoiled me a bit. And me and my partner really liked Bath. So I emailed my old supervisor in Bath and asked whether he knew of any jobs going in the region. And he said, no, but I've got a PhD. So that is honestly the reason. Obviously, I thought about it a bit harder than just that. That's how I ended up back in Bath doing a PhD, which was a case award sponsored by Airbus, sort of looking at engineering, but sort of information and knowledge management. After that, it kind of led me to do a postdoc for a bit. And from there, I moved into research management, first at Bath, then at University of Bristol. And from there, I joined what was then HEFCE, the Higher Education Funding Council for England of blessed memory, which was abolished a year after I joined, I think. I joined knowing it was about to be abolished.
I was going to say, this isn't some sign of
no, not every organisation I've worked for must or been abolished. But some people will know that HEFCE morphed into what is now the Office for Students on the kind of student side, and the research and knowledge exchange policy functions of HEFCE turned into Research England in UKRI, and spent about 5 years there working on some knowledge exchange and policy and funding, including the knowledge exchange framework, before joining Oxentia December 21. So I've been in my current role at Oxentia for about 18-20 months now. And that's my history.
Yeah. So have you found any particular significant differences of working for these different kinds of organizations? It's interesting the way you've taken the same sort of theme in your work, this knowledge exchange, but through different kinds of workplaces.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I guess my transition from sort of academic and, PhD and then postdoc to sort of research management, sort of project management roles, that's where kind of it really sparked my interest in knowledge exchange. And that has been the theme. It's like, how do we make a difference with all of this brilliant research that's going on in universities? And that's been, I guess, the thread throughout those different jobs. I guess it was really interesting moving from universities to kind of funding and, the other side of the fence. It's a very different kind of dynamic. It's amazing how nice people are to you when you've got 250 million pounds to spend. So that was really interesting as well. But I think the great thing about HEFCE and then Research England is that they had a really, still do have a really good and close relationship with the university sector. So both universities and UKRI, Research England felt very familiar in terms of, who the people were, the culture, how we interacted with each other, respected each other, but challenged each other. And that was really nice. I guess there was a bigger change going into, private consultancy. But many of the things, I guess, that drove me a bit mad in other places is completely different here. So, the pace, the number of projects you're working on simultaneously, etc. That's been a really big shift. But that recurrent theme of, it sounds really cheesy, but, wanting to do something good in the world and get a positive outcome for this huge public investment in all of this research, that has been a recurring theme, and that continues in Oxentia just as it started in Bath.
So seeing that the pace has changed in your current job, I'm guessing it's faster. That's what I've heard from a lot of people, that private companies tend to.
It can be fast paced. I mean, it's not to say that work at universities or the public sector is slow. I guess it's just you're very time constrained with when clients want things delivered, and it's a very hard deadline. So average project, I mean, it varies hugely. Maybe there's not really a kind of typical average, but it wouldn't be unusual to have an engagement which lasted 4 to 6 weeks and then you're on to the next thing. And it would be rare that you had a very small self-contained piece of work in Research England. By its nature, it tends to be kind of longer, more complex kind of undertakings, like reforming a funding formula or formulating a new policy, or designing a funding call, which might then take months to design and then be open, and then you still might be evaluating it 5 years later. So yeah, so it's not to say that I work any harder or now. It's just the kind of the short-term duration and the fact you're moving maybe between really different sets of projects.
Yeah,
and I think all over the world as well, I guess. So.
Yeah, and certainly I can see those sorts of things would appeal to different kinds of people. I know a lot of people find the pace of change in or just conclusion of projects and things in places like universities and the civil service to be tryingly slow sometimes. So for those that like that faster turnover, it's great to know that there are places out there where that's an option.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of merit into taking your time and doing something right. But I won't lie and say that I wasn't frustrated at the pace of change sometimes. I'm always reminded, I can't quite remember who said it. I think it was Tony Raven, who's the ex chief executive of Cambridge Enterprise. And he said, sort of trying to get a university to change is like guiding an elephant at the end of an elastic band. You can pull very carefully and the elephant moves very slowly. If you pull too hard, the elastic band snaps and the elephant wanders off in a different direction. I guess that's the kind of frustration, is like, I want to make a difference. I know the potential of this stuff, but you're working within a rightly cautious and system where, you can have big implications. If you get a policy wrong, it can really affect, universities' ability to deliver and everything else. So it's right that you do have that proper consideration. But yeah, it does sometimes feel like tugging an elephant.
I love that analogy. I've now got a mental picture of that. I feel somebody should draw a cartoon of it. So given in all these things that you've worked on, these different roles you've had over the years, I wonder if maybe you could tell us about one or two projects that you're really proud of that you've been involved with.
I think, so reflecting on my time in Research England, I think I veer between being kind of proud and terrified of the knowledge exchange framework. So, this is something that when I joined then HEFCE, I didn't know was coming. It was announced by the then Universities Minister, Joe Johnson, in around late 2017, I think. And it formed a big part of my time at Research England. And I still talk about it now, because we do a lot of work with universities in the UK. And it's great to see that it's driven positive change, that it's given people, I've talked to lots of sort of knowledge exchange professionals, and they've said, one of the positive things was it gives visibility and this sort of parity of esteem to knowledge exchange and commercialisation when compared to research and teaching. And because the output of the KEF is a very visual kind of thing, it gives them something they can slap in front of the Vice-Chancellor and say, we need to do better. So I'm really proud of it in terms of, hopefully it's affecting positive change in the sector. But I'm also kind of tempered by, my feeling is just like I'm absolutely certain we did the best possible job we could. We consulted really widely, but with the metrics we had available and with the data we had available. And I think it hopefully, as the data improves and, my colleagues who are taking it forward in UKRI, continually iterate it, it'll become even more useful. So I am proud of it, but I feel like it's the start of a journey rather than the kind of, the publication of the first iteration of that framework is the end of the journey.
I think when you're bringing something new into being, it's impossible to get it right first time, isn't it? There's always going to be tweaks and changes, and then the world changes, and then things, it doesn't quite fit anymore. So
yeah, absolutely. But when you're doing something that affects the whole sector, and when I really believe that the sector's doing brilliant things, it kind of tortures you a bit to think, am I doing the right thing? Are we going to do more harm than good? Is this going to land well? I spent so much time just, either working in universities or visiting universities, talking to people in universities as part of that job. You feel a real, personal responsibility, pressure to get it right. Yeah, I am, overall proud of that. But yeah, it's kind of, tortured me slightly at times.
Yeah, with something so significant, I think that your emotions you got around it, I think, are just a sign that you wanted to do a good job and do it well, aren't they? To do, as you say, do something that allows the work that people are doing to shine rather than making it more challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And that goes back to that, good positive relationship that Research England has with the sector, and part of that is you don't want to let them down. It's simple as that.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, I mean, I think in talking about that, I think you've touched on both the success and the challenge in that particular instance. Are there any other challenges that have been something that you've really had to work at overcoming as you've gone through your career?
Yeah, I think the other common thread that occurs to me is around, I'm nothing if not kind of data and evidence driven. And reflecting from my whole career from universities to where I am now, so much of what we do, I place such an importance on where is the data, what is it telling us, do we have the right information to make a decision, so whether that's about the KEF or whether it's about decision to fund someone or not, whether it's about in Oxentia we're providing advice on strategy. This isn't about, it's partly about experience and gut feeling and everything else. But, I place such an emphasis on the data, the evidence. Is it rigorous? Is it right? Is it, are we interpreting it in the right way? I think that's been a real kind of common thread through a lot of things I've undertaken. I guess it's where some of my frustrations come from. I guess it's where my kind of passion lies as well. Because it kind of underpins everything. If you don't have the right data, if you don't have the right information, you can't make good decisions.
And do you feel that at the moment we're collecting, is the right data available to make good decisions, or are there little things that could be changed that would help to provide the evidence and the rationale for decision making? I think as a sector, we collect huge amounts of data. Yeah.
I think everyone will relate to that.
Yeah, but is it the right data? I think that's my question.
But it's the right data for the purpose that person wanted it collected for at the time they wanted it collected. But another really interesting project I undertook at Oxentia was on behalf of Universities UK, UKRI and the Wellcome Trust, looking at the second phase of the review of concordats and initiatives. And again, what strikes me there is that all of these concordats and initiatives, and this is what we found when we reported, they've all come about because of really legitimate reasons and for very kind of good purpose. But collectively, there's maybe areas where they could have maybe aligned better, or you could think about how do we harmonize data, or how can we harmonize the sort of reporting and the outputs. So I don't think it's that we're necessarily collecting the wrong data, but we're collecting a lot, and maybe we don't pay enough consideration to what's out there and how we can harmonize and consolidate. And then sometimes just new requirements emerge. So another thing we're really interested in is inclusive entrepreneurship, for example. We're doing some work at the moment thinking about how can we make entrepreneurship for students, so students getting involved in starting their own company, etc., more inclusive. And we know there's issues with inequalities in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability. But what we're finding is the intersections which are really important there. And the data doesn't necessarily exist or exist in a way that we can use it how we want it to. So I think it's this constantly kind of evolving thing. We have to constantly reevaluate and think, how can we harmonize more? Is this still fit for purpose in the current context? It might have been absolutely brilliant 10 years ago, but the world moves on, and our collection, data collection and how we analyze and use data has to keep up with it.
Yeah, that's true. And how we make that data accessible as well. I think certainly even some of the work that I've done, sometimes it's not, you kind of have the sense that data's out there somewhere, but you can't always find it or access it or use it, as you say, in the way that you would like.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's available at different levels of granularity. So a lot of work we do at the moment is thinking about universities' performance. Part of that might involve benchmarking, but there's only really so much you can do with institutional level data. You need to really get under the skin of the university and think, okay, we can tell at a kind of institutional level there's differences in performance between institutions, but that doesn't really mean much unless you know about the disciplinary mix and the mission and the purpose and the values of those universities, and whether they have particular types of departments or not, what their student population looks like. So you really need to get under the lid of it, and that's both something that fascinates me and drives me mad.
Excellent. Well, maybe that is something that I don't want to put ideas in your head there, but maybe that's something you might want to use your research adjacent magic wand for. So I do ask all of my guests, if they had a magic wand, what would they like to change about the sector that they work in, assuming money and time is no object. What would you like to change?
I'm tempted to say ban 3-letter acronyms.
I think you'd get a lot of support for that.
But I think, given what I've done and given what I've said about my frustrations, I think it would be, I don't know, something around this beautifully harmonized, accessible information that was completely burden-free to gather, and that more than that decision makers and policy makers actually had the ability to read and understand and act on it properly. That
does sound like something that we need a bit of magic dust to make that happen, but definitely a worthy aim. Oh, thank you. So if somebody was considering following your footsteps, whether that's into knowledge exchange or into this kind of consultancy work that you do, what advice would you give them?
I think for consultancy, having sort of lived experience of what you're consulting on is really important. So yeah, I guess probably a lot of people have had bad experiences or perceptions or misconceptions about what consultants do, in terms of whether they have the right experience or how are they basing their decisions or their advice to you. If you have aspirations to move into kind of consultancy, innovation consultancy or management consultancy more generally, don't disregard your kind of lived experience and the importance of your experience, and think, reflect on that and think, what have I done over the years? What have I learned? Where have I identified things that need fixing, things that work really well in one institution but not in another? And that's way more valuable than any kind of MBA or project management qualification. So I guess what would my advice be? Generally, knowledge exchange, I think is fascinating. Whether you call it research impact or knowledge exchange or engagement or whatever language we use, I think the idea of helping people translate what they're doing into something which has economic, societal, environmental, health benefit is a really great thing to do. It's very rewarding. And yeah, if you can use that experience to then spread that even further through consultancy, then go for it. I don't think it's for everyone, but it's been a really interesting journey for me.
Excellent. Well, I think it just remains to invite you to tell people where they can find you if they want to know more about you. What's the best place to track you down?
Probably Twitter. If anyone is anyone on Twitter still?
I don't know. Is anybody still on Twitter? X. I don't even know what to call it. Yeah.
But I'm Hamish _McAlpine on Twitter. I'm active on LinkedIn as well, or you can just drop me a line at info@oxentia.com.
I'll get links to those and put them in the show notes. So it just remains to say thank you so much for coming along and having a chat. It is, as so often the case with these interviews that I do, often I'll think, oh yeah, I know a bit about that. And then I go, I actually know this is a whole new world. So yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Really enjoyed it.
Thanks for listening to Research Adjacent. If you're listening in a podcast app, please check you're subscribed and then use the links under the episode to find full show notes and to follow the podcast on LinkedIn, Twitter or Instagram. Also, make sure that you're subscribed to the Research Adjacent Roundup newsletter. You can also find all the links and other episodes at www.researchadjacent.com. Research Adjacent is presented and produced by Sarah McCluskey, and you, yes you, get a big gold star for listening right to the end. See you next time.